One of the tragedies of Alister MacKenzie's death in 1934 at the age of 63 was that he never lived to see Augusta National become one of the most admired and iconic golf courses in the world. He never saw the fully completed course, but he always believed his Augusta National design was destined for greatness. Still, it might have surprised him to see how the course he completed a year earlier with the golfing great Bobby Jones had morphed into the avatar of American golf, and how the individual holes he created evolved into instantly recognizable templates to almost everyone who plays the game. In particular, he never knew that his 13th hole had gone on to be acknowledged as one of the game's most revered par fives, a masterpiece of risk-reward philosophy that's immortalized for its beauty and the role it plays in determining Masters champions. I'm Duncan, architecture editor at GolfDigest, and today we're going to take a deep dive into one of the world's greatest and most recognizable par fives, the 13th hole at Augusta National Golf Club. MacKenzie and Bob Jones knew that Augusta National had the potential to be one of the best courses in the country, at least one of the best not positioned on the ocean. In fact, their goal was to build what MacKenzie called, quote-unquote, the ideal inland course. The old Berkman's Nursery that Jones and Clifford Roberts purchased in 1931 to be the site of Augusta National was full of the ingredients MacKenzie wanted for an ideal inland course. Plenty of spacious land, towering pines, flowing streams, up and down topography, and beautiful flowering shrubs and trees. These are the exact elements that compose the par 5 13th to this day. Let's take a closer look. Appropriately named Azalea for the hundreds of azalea shrubs that line the left side of the hole, the 13th plays at 545 yards and starts with a tee shot from high above and behind the 12th green. The fairway begins to swing left at roughly 275 yards off the tee and hugs the pines and a small tributary of Rays Creek on the inside corner all the way to the green. The stream has always been there, and it crosses the front and right side of the green. This means all approaches, no matter the length, must come into it through the air. The green, positioned at the foot of a wooded slope, is fairly large at 8,300 square feet, and it plays like an island surrounded by trouble. For reference, the average green size at Augusta National is roughly 6,400 square feet. The green itself is divided by a ridge that runs diagonally through the center to create distinct upper back and lower front plateaus near the creek. Each tier has several available hole locations that divide the green into a series of smaller targets. These 4 large bunkers banked into the hillside give the green one of the most instantly recognizable looks on the course, but they're mostly decorative and don't see a lot of balls in Masters play. There's also a deep trough that runs between the green's collar and the bottom of the bunkers. This tricky swale collects approach shots that fly too far and leaves delicate little chips and pitches back up to the putting surface, again to a green that runs away. The final element players must contend with is the slope of the fairway. It's tilted like a corner at Talladega Superspeedway, banking from the high side near the pines that separate it from the 14th hole, straight down to the tributary, a fall of roughly 25 to 30 feet. You always hear people express surprise at how hilly Augusta National is, saying that you have to see it with your own eyes and walk it with your own feet to understand the elevation changes. Trust me, it's true. And the 13th is a perfect example of this. The side-to-side slope of this fairway is greater than any other hole on the course. The play off the elevated tee is a strong right-to-left drive that turns the corner far enough to open up a view of the green. If the drives don't move, they can run through the fairway and into the pine straw, forcing a layup on the second shot, or a heroic escape if your name is Phil Mickelson or Jordan Spieth. In these situations, the layup needs to be well thought out depending on the hole location. Angles are everything if a player decides to lay up on this hole. You might remember during the second round of the 2024 Masters, Bryson DeChambeau hit a long drive straight into the pine trees. When he couldn't find an angle back out, he decided to create one himself, clearing hundreds of patrons out of the way and then famously hoisting an Augusta National signpost over his shoulder to remove it from the alternate line. He hit a second shot through the 14th fairway before plopping a wedge shot onto the green from 134 yards and sinking the putt for birdie. An average good drive will find the fairway, but leave a stance with the ball well above a right-handed player's feet and below those of a left-handed player. In MacKenzie's day and up until the 2000s, the long approach shot going for the green in 2 was played with a long iron or even a wooden club. Today, players are swinging mid-irons and occasionally, for some, a hybrid club. The longest hitters can cut the corner, and some can take their drives over the pines. If they pull off that high-risk shot, the ball can release down the slope and settle in a relatively flat area near the tributary. This is the garden spot that yields the shortest and most direct access to the green. From here, it's go time. So that's the calculus of the hole, but none of it precisely explains why Augusta National's 13th is considered the finest short par 5 in golf. To understand what makes it great, we must enter into evidence two words: momentous decision. This is the phrase Bob Jones used to describe the second shot at 13. In normal circumstances, the second shot isn't too hard for good players if they get their drives in the fairway, which is 35 to 45 yards across. But during the intense pressure of the Masters, with so much on the line and so much turmoil lurking around the green, the choice to challenge the green in two turns into something more existential. Context is everything, especially during the final round. Virtually all Masters competitors have the ability to easily get home in two shots, but the design and distance of the hole is a test, and the question is, do they have the nerve to try it, off awkward lies, under the most extreme pressure? The greatness of the hole lies in the balance between the plausible chance for birdie or eagle and the consequences, both mental and practical, of not pulling it off. Jones and MacKenzie wanted players to sweat over this shot, and the land gave them everything they needed to set up the round's most momentous decision. The 13th was as much discovered as it was designed. Longtime club chairman Clifford Roberts described it as nature-made, and it was the first hole the designers identified when they took their initial walk around the Augusta National property back in 1931. MacKenzie built it by simply putting a green on the opposite side of the creek, a tee next to the 12th green, and then leaving the rest of it more or less how it was. As I pointed out in our prior video about the 11th hole, when Augusta National opened in 1933, the two nines were originally flipped, so the 13th, as we know it today, actually started out as the course's fourth hole. Because those holes were down by Rays Creek at the lowest elevation on the property, they took the longest to warm up, delaying play on Georgia's cold, often frosty spring mornings. By the second playing of the Masters in 1935, the nines were reversed, creating what we now know as Amen Corner with the 11th, 12th, and 13th holes. Initially, 13 was 455 yards for the members and 480 yards for championships. The tee was located just steps from the right edge of the 12th green, so the tee shot played even more uphill than it does now. The 13th has undergone fewer changes since its creation than most any other hole at Augusta. For the first 40 years of the Masters, the length of the hole varied only between 470 and 485 yards. The first real lengthening happened in 1994 when 20 yards were added, stretching it to a still reasonable short par 5 length of 485 yards. In 2002, Augusta National initiated a major lengthening of several holes. Some observers claimed the club was trying to tiger-proof the course, though the added yardage only played into the hands of Tiger and the longer players. As part of this effort, the 13th was extended to 510 yards after the club purchased a small parcel of land from the adjacent Augusta Country Club, something they'd done a number of times over the years. Players were now walking off 12 and climbing 50 yards back into the trees to tee off. As the professionals continued to bomb their way through the 2000s, it was becoming increasingly easy for them to shape three metals around the corner or hoist drives up and over the pines to be in position to attack the green with short irons and sometimes wedges. This led to too many of the quote-unquote cheap birdies Bobby Jones warned against decades earlier. So, once again, Augusta National responded by acquiring more land from their neighbor, this time around 5 acres, and in 2023 they introduced a new tournament tee that lengthened 13 to its current distance of 545 yards. The Masters tee is now 90 yards behind the 12th green, nestled into the hillside, and competitors are teeing off from what used to be Augusta Country Club's 9th fairway. The added length means that players need to hit drives almost 300 yards to get past the corner of the dogleg to have a clear view of the green. And if worst comes to worst, there appears to be room for Augusta National to extend the tee another 35 to 40 yards before they hit the new boundary. Like every green at the club, the 13th has been rebuilt numerous times over the years, often to alleviate drainage and shade issues. The first major reconstruction occurred in 1957, with the current contours based on a concept proposed by Robert Trent Jones. As green speeds increased through the decades, those contours have softened, especially after the club converted all the surfaces from the slower ryegrass overseed to bentgrass in the early 1980s. But in every instance since then, the club has made sure to preserve the high-low tier division that makes approaching the green so challenging. The bunkers built into the wooded hillside behind the green were added after the course opened and were originally more like scrapes or scabs, rugged and shallow exposures of sand, very much in the MacKenzie naturalistic style. As the flora on the hillside filled in, the bunkers were shifted and rebuilt beginning in the 1950s, but eventually settled into their current formation, set higher up into the slope, as 4 large and increasingly manicured figures that oversee the play on the green. Small drainage swales left and right of the green were added in the 1970s, but the current trough behind the green was created by Jack Nicklaus's design firm before the 1983 Masters. The The green surface used to run up flush to the bottom edge of the bunkers, and the fringe would help hold up incoming shots. Nicklaus's new waist-deep swale meant that balls would now tumble down into the impression and result in those terrifying little chip shots. Players hated the change, and the story goes that even Nicklaus was surprised when he saw how deep it was for the first time. Because he was still an active competitor at the Masters, he had outsourced the actual work to his then associate Bob Cupp and his crew. But as Nicklaus allegedly claimed, "That's not what I told them to do." Nevertheless, the swale, with some modifications, has provided a unique mode of defense, and it still exists today. Even more interesting is what's happening in front of the green. The creek has always been a constant hazard, but it too has been redesigned over the years. Under normal conditions, the stream contained a slow trickle of water that rose and fell with rainfall. The grass on the banks was always thick and unkempt, just as when MacKenzie first encountered it, with little patches of sand and gravel at the bottom. In later years, portions of the steep banks were fortified with rock. Obviously, players tried to avoid the creek, but they also knew that if they hit into it, there was a 50-50 chance they could play their ball from the grassy banks or the creek bed and possibly get up and down. That element of random luck didn't sit well with everyone. Why should one player who hit into the creek be penalized and another not? So, prior to the 1989 tournament, Hord Hardin, the chairman of the club, instructed that the creek be dammed. This ensured there was always a deeper pool of water in the stream, the level of which the club could always control. The banks were also steepened and mowed short, so now any ball that failed to clear the hazard rolled back down into the water, submerged and unplayable. That's the way it was until 1996, when the club quietly removed the dam and lowered the water level again, restoring the meandering flow of the creek. It's still possible, though rare, to recover from the stream. Whether the water is high or low, the creek has been a watery grave for Masters players on more than one occasion. Angel Cabrera in 2013, Fred Couples in 1998, Curtis Strange in 1985, and amateur Billy Joe Patton in 1954 all surrendered final round leads or shares of the lead when they hit shots into the stream and made bogey or double bogey. Each ended up not winning, 3 of the 4 losing by just a single stroke. The biggest catastrophe posed by the 13th, however, isn't necessarily the threat of the hazard, but the threat of squandering perhaps the best chance on the back 9 to gain an invaluable stroke. Azalea comes off Augusta's brutal run of par 4s at 9, 10, and 11, followed by arguably the most pressure-packed short iron shot in all of golf, the par 3 12th over Rays Creek. To survive these holes without a blemish on a Sunday requires something nearing perfection. After this gauntlet, the 13th feels like breaking out into the open field, the first chance to run and go on offense. A birdie or eagle here can jumpstart a green jacket run, as traditional Sunday hole locations on the next 3 holes present chances for even more red numbers. In fact, 19 of the 25 winners since 2000 have birdied the 13th during the final round. The momentousness of the decision to go for the 13th green in 2 has been re-enhanced by the lengthening of the hole by 35 yards. Some players believe it makes the tee shot easier because now they can hit driver without needing to shape it right to left. But it still puts a longer club in their hands off a steep lie for the approach. The club's goal has been to recreate the kind of intense dilemmas that played out during one of the Masters for the ages, the duel between Greg Norman and Nick Faldo in 1996. Norman began Sunday with a 6-stroke lead, but by the time he and Faldo, his closest challenger, were on the 13th tee, it was Faldo who had a 2-stroke lead. After their drives, Norman was up in the pine straw on the high side of the hole, 2 down and 230 yards from the pin, but with a clear view of the green. Norman needed to press for an eagle to close the gap, but also knew a bogey would all but end his chances for his first Masters title. The momentousness of the decision was clear, and after more than 3.5 minutes of deliberation, Norman elected to lay up, playing down toward the hazard on the left, then leaving himself with an 80-yard pitch for his third. Faldo was in the fairway and several yards closer to the green. The easy decision, up 2, would be to follow Norman's layup. But he sensed an opportunity to slam the door. From an awkward downhill stance with the ball above his feet, he also chewed on the decision for over 3 minutes, first addressing the ball with his 5-wood, before going back to his bag for his 2-iron. He eventually pulled the trigger with his iron and hit his ball safely onto the upper plateau of the green in 2. Both men ended up making birdie after Norman sank a 12-foot putt, but the conundrum of the hole caused the 2 greatest players in the world at that moment to sweat out their decisions for nearly a combined 8 minutes. Norman's conservative choice ultimately failed to gain him a stroke, and he walked off the green with one less chance to close the gap on Faldo. Defending champion Ben Crenshaw, commentating from the television studio, summed it up best. "I can't get over the brilliance of this hole," he said. "Year after year, it just absolutely wrings you out with these decisions." We'll never know whether Alister MacKenzie would endorse all the changes and transformations that have happened at Augusta National in the 90-plus years since he died. But we can bet that if he saw Azalea today, he'd recognize it as his own and savor, as Ben Crenshaw said, the brilliance of the hole that never fails to wring the hearts and minds of those who play it. Thanks for watching. If there's another hole you'd like to see us break down, let us know in the comments below.